smoking cars over there, dude.
Hey folks, welcome to another video from plaintruth.info. Here's more proof positive. Blue laser lights, which people are reporting. We've got now at least 3 separate cell phone smart cameras identifying blue lasers on video, 1 from a helicopter and 2 from handheld cameras, as you can see right here. This is proof positive. We're going to take this to the fire departments. We're meeting with fire people now. They know something was wrong, and they've seen the videos and all the directed energy comments, and they want to learn more. So we're taking this to them. You can take this video as well. We also have the Santa Rosa Planning Department papers back from 2016. The exact roadmap where the fires hit in the Santa Rosa area matched the planning rezoning for Agenda 21. Stack 'em and pack 'em, green design, walking, no fireplaces kind of communities with density increases over 100%, planned on October 7th, 2 days before the fires. We have city council members and now the Sonoma Media Design Group, or Sonoma Media Group and the Sonoma Design Group. The Sonoma Design Group is the laser weapon companies, organizations, and the Sonoma Media investments we'll get into that own the newspapers around here with Democratic lobbyist connections and all sorts of nefarious types involved. So we'll get into that in the next video, but I want to get this laser out, folks. This is what's the smoking gun, the smoking laser. Here it is right here. So proof positive. Let's spread the word, get it around, and let's stop this madness by education. First, it always starts with education, so please share.
Barbara, 10,000 acres of wooded residential land were scorched in an instant when a laser cannon aboard the Strategic Defense Peace Platform misfired today during routine startup tests. Casey?
Yes, it was a day of mourning for the families of 113 people known dead at this hour. Among them, 2 former United States presidents who had retired in the Santa Barbara area. A day of mourning for a country.
So I've been collecting comments from people, from readers, putting in what they saw in the area and documenting it, and we'll be presenting this to the fire departments and appropriate agencies. But let me just show you this list, and I just highlighted the word blue, and you can see all the blue flashes, blue laser light, really bright blue, as you'll see in a minute from this Take a Walk. He actually filmed the flashes, and we have other people doing the same. But here, blue flashes, blue lasers, nothing I've ever seen before. And it goes down. And in Potter Valley, I saw blue streaks like flares. I live in Santa Rosa, west of 3rd, and I saw blue light. I live in Santa Rosa, Indian Valley, I saw blue lightning. And it continues on. I have pages and pages of this, folks. And Sue Nami says, sacrifice all right. My cousin in Miami saw the blue lights coming down from the sky as well, right in the thick of it. I was speaking with her when she saw them. Firefighters say to when you explained about the aluminum from chemtrail. So this was posted the day after the fire, supercharged by powerful winds, whipped through Napa, Sonoma, and Mendocino, killing at least 10 people. Starting in the middle of the night, hopscotched across neighborhoods, raced across fields, jumped freeways, gusts up to 70 miles an hour, walls of flames nearly 100 feet high, throwing embers ahead like hot fingers into strip malls and subdivisions. Many people who fled the surge had enough time to grab car keys, perhaps a pet, and not much more. All right, here's a chart from the San Francisco Chronicle of the wind, and you can see that there was no wind. I was here this day in the Santa Rosa area. We got evacuated twice, and all of a sudden about 10 o'clock, the wind started swirling. But before that, in my comments, was there was no wind. The storm came out of nowhere, and then all of a sudden it gusts up to 80 miles an hour, and then within 2-3 hours, it was completely back to normal again. Nothing normal. Let's take a look again at the Madeira fire last year caught in Portugal. And look at the vortex, folks. Look at the spinning winds that create the vortex energy to create the kinetic energy for the plasma weapon beam to focus its energy, directed energy, electromagnetic pulsing energy. But look at the vortex. Look at the swirling winds, which everybody here felt and everybody here commented about. And at night they turn into blue flashes. That's what we all saw. This was genocide. This was murder. This was an attack on U.S. soil. We need to wake up, folks. We need to wake up right now.
I mean, the storm too.
And here we see the comments from Take a Walk talking about the blue flashes that they recorded on their camera here, which will be coming up here in a second. But again, this was coming from above. These were directed energy weapons. They were torching and murdering people in their homes, fried in their homes. The body count, we will not know the true body count ever. They will never give it to us. But there's many, many people that perished in their homes. Just like in the Hurricane Harvey, the floods came in the middle of the night. Both started about 1-2 a.m. They didn't have a chance. So here, Take a Walk has the moon, and you'll see the blue, the flash. There it is. See the flash? There it was. This is another cell phone recorded as well. There's another beam right there from a cell phone recorded. Prima facie evidence, folks. Here it is. Trees.
That is the craziest.
Ever seen trees burn like this?
Seen.
No one has.
It's hollowed out the tree.
From the inside, not on the outside.
Fire and
how do trees burn from the inside and not on the outside?
Straight up the middle of a tree.
It had to be directed energy weapons, folks. They torched the place with thousands and thousands of degrees, targeted certain areas, certain people, certain homes, certain businesses. Agenda 21, weather war terrorism.
That is nuts.
Greetings world, we are Anonymous TruthSec. Today we will be talking about the fires that have and still are devastating California. Let us take a look at that situation before moving any further.
Breaking news, the state of emergency in California, where 12 wildfires are burning right now. One in particular, the so-called Valley Fire, is fierce, fast-moving, and fatal. And tonight we've got the stunning images and the survivors, both human and animal. Here's ABC's Matt Gutman.
The fire swept down the valley with apocalyptic fury. Flames as high as skyscrapers hopscotching the canopies. Raining flaming terror. Families fleeing, navigating this hellish landscape. Cinders swirling in the air. 23,000 people displaced in Northern California.
You guys pretty tired?
We're getting there. Yeah, all of our resources have been going at it for about a month and a half.
Like others out here, selective about what they could save.
Firefighters are letting this burn. They're not concerned with this kind of grass fire. Their main concern right now, because they're so overwhelmed, is protecting homes and people.
The Valley Fire, 100 miles north of San Francisco, threatening Napa County, fueled by dry conditions and 40-mile-per-hour winds, exploding from a small fire over the weekend to a 60,000-square-acre monster. These time-lapse videos capture the panicked exodus. Watch as this driver struggles to find his way out. Fire everywhere he turns. You can hear the fire's jet engine roar. Others cornered by those ferocious flames and smoke.
Now, take a look at the aftermath.
is what you'll see during a directed energy attack. 3 separate recordings of directed energy weapon lasers used in the California fires.
Oh, fuck! Yeah, there's hella fucking cars over there, dude.
Hey folks, welcome to another video from plaintruth.info. Here's more proof positive. Blue laser lights, which people are reporting. We've got now at least 3 separate cell phone smart cameras identifying blue lasers on video, 1 from a helicopter and 2 from handheld cameras, as you can see right here. This is proof positive. We're going to take this to the fire departments. We're meeting with fire people now. They know something was wrong, and they've seen the videos and all the directed energy comments, and they want to learn more. So we're taking this to them. You can take this video as well. We also have the Santa Rosa Planning Department papers back from 2016. The exact roadmap where the fires hit in the Santa Rosa area matched the planning rezoning for Agenda 21. Stack 'em and pack 'em, green design, walking, no fireplaces kind of communities with density increases over 100%, planned on October 7th, 2 days before the fires. We have city council members and now the Sonoma Media Design Group, or Sonoma Media Group and the Sonoma Design Group. The Sonoma Design Group is the
I think it's a Dostoevsky quote who said, "Perhaps it's beauty that will save the earth."
We are creatures here just like all the others. We didn't create them, and we have no right to destroy them. We're losing species today at 1,000 times the rate that species do normally go extinct. We are killing off the rest of the creation.
The thing that's at the heart of our daily lives is the abundance of cheap fossil fuel. That's what's made us rich. The problem is that same fossil fuel is now killing us.
Climate change is no longer just a consequence of the Industrial Revolution. It is a crime against humanity.
I just feel it's unfair that people in the global south has to make all these adaptations when the cause of the problem, the root problem, is in the north.
Nós sabemos que os culpados pelo que hoje está acontecendo no mundo não são os pobres, não são os pequenos agricultores, mas é essa sede capitalista pelo lucro e pelo consumo que é que está destruindo esse mundo.
And the terrible thing about the capitalist mentality is it can't be satisfied. The everlasting competition, the everlasting search for profit is going to pull with it nature, our true foundation, our true being.
Money rules is probably the most simple way to explain it. Money becomes the means through which everything is evaluated.
Mother Earth is crying out for help. We are killing her so people can make a profit.
There is movement building around the world, and what you're seeing is that the movements are connecting. So the environmental movement is connecting to the sustainable food justice movement. The food justice movement is connecting to the women's movement. The women's movement is connecting to the LGBTQ movement. So we just simply cannot look at these problems in silos.
How painful it is, and how many of us survive, and how much of nature survives, all of that depends upon what we do now.
If you want an adventure, boy, what a time to choose to be alive. Don't waste time in self-pity over darkness. Don't waste time trying to figure out better circumstances that you might like. You're born into this, and you're here to love it.
One of the most exciting scientific findings of the past half-century has been the discovery of widespread trophic cascades. A trophic cascade is an ecological process which starts at the top of the food chain and tumbles all the way down to the bottom. We all know that whales eat fish and krill, and some people, certain politicians in Japan for instance, have argued that killing whales is good for human beings, as it boosts the food available for us to eat. And so you would think. But as the great whales declined, so did the numbers of fish and krill. It seems counterintuitive. Surely their numbers would rise as their major predators disappeared. But it now turns out that whales not only eat these animals, they also keep them alive. In fact, they help to sustain the entire living system of the ocean. Whales feed at depth in waters that are often pitch dark, and then they return to the surface, to the photic zone, where there's enough light for photosynthesis to happen. There they release what biologists call fecal plumes, vast outpourings of poo, poonamis. These plumes are rich in iron and nitrogen, nutrients which are often very scarce in the surface waters. And these nutrients fertilize the plant plankton that lives in the only place where plants can survive, the photic zone. Fertilizing the surface waters isn't the only thing the whales do. By plunging up and down through the water column, they also keep kicking the plankton back up into the photic zone, giving it more time to reproduce before it sinks into the abyss. Even today, though whale populations have been greatly reduced, the vertical mixing of water caused by movements of animals up and down through the column of the oceans is astonishingly roughly the same as the amount of mixing caused by all the world's wind and waves and tides. More plant plankton means more animal plankton, on which the larger creatures then feed. In other words, more whales means more fish and krill. But the story doesn't end here, because plant plankton not only feeds the animals of the sea, it also absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. When eventually it sinks to the ocean floor, it takes this carbon out of circulation down to a place where it remains for thousands of years. The more whales there are, the more plankton there is. The more plankton there is, the more carbon is drawn out of the air. When whales were at their historical populations, before great numbers of them were killed, it seems that they might have been responsible for removing tens of millions of tons of carbon from the atmosphere every year. Whales change the climate. The return of the great whales, if they're allowed to recover, could be seen as a benign form of geoengineering. It could undo some of the damage we've done, both to the living systems of the sea and to the atmosphere.
Just a year ago, we passed 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Now, the pre-industrial level was about 280 parts per million. So human society in the industrial era has raised the level of CO2 in the atmosphere by about 40%, and many people fear that before we're done, we're going to double it or even triple it.
We're pumping CO2 into the atmosphere at a speed which we have never seen before in modern human history. We are absolutely racing into uncharted territory.
In our lifetime, human beings left behind the Holocene, this 10,000-year period of benign climatic stability that coincides with the rise of human civilization. We have crossed a great threshold, and we stand on the edge of others.
I remember when the Weather Channel was this kind of like nice, sleepy little station. Now it's like a horror show. The climate is being disrupted. That's not for next year or 1,000 years from now. That's happening right now.
What all climate scientists will agree on is that the entire atmosphere has changed. All the atmospheric dynamics have changed. So every event that happens now is in the context of climate change, is different from how it would have been.
typhoon slammed the Philippines with winds of 195 miles per hour. That's higher than the winds from Hurricane Sandy and Katrina combined.
The world is mobilizing to help the Philippines, but just a trickle of food and water and medicine has reached the victims of Typhoon Haiyan.
More than 1 million people were forced to flee their homes, many now trying to salvage what's left.
Hundreds of thousands are thronging relief centers, desperate for life's necessities.
Many residents covered their faces to mask the smell of the dead while they searched for relatives in some of the hardest hit areas.
This is one of the top storms ever seen on this planet.
Mr. President, Your Excellency, what my country is going through as a result of this extreme climate event is madness. Super Typhoon Haiyan made landfall in my own family's hometown. And the devastation is staggering. I struggle to find words to describe how I feel about the losses. To anyone outside who continues to deny and ignore the reality that is climate change, I dare them to get off their ivory towers and away from the comfort of their armchairs. I dare them to go to the islands of the Pacific. We refuse as a nation to accept a future where super typhoons like Haiyan become a way of life. We refuse to accept that running away from storms, evacuating our families, counting our dead become a way of life. We simply refuse to. We can fix this. We can stop this madness.
Hello, hello, hello. All right, folks, we know why we're here. We have 80 days starting tomorrow to pull off the largest climate march in history. It's really important for folks to remember that although climate change affects everyone, the impacts are not evenly distributed. And we're asking each one of these breakout groups, prioritize people of color, folks, because this is real, it's disproportionate, and it's time to bring it.
They need to act on a binding global agreement to reduce greenhouse gases. We can do that and create jobs at the same time.
Part of what we're doing is moving people from fossil fuels to the solutions and also presenting them with economic opportunities around the solution.
The idea of who's going to be leading this march are the people in this room.
This environmental issue is the singular issue of our time, of our day, that will determine how we live, where we live, and if we live.
The most important tool that we have is our people power. There are already 325 groups, and that list is going to grow every single day. Whatever you're thinking about doing to help build this mobilization, rethink it and make it bigger, make it bolder. Our job is to make sure everybody hears about it, and then they'll get there. They'll get there. That's our job. In 1982, the UN convened a first special session on nuclear disarmament. And we came together and said, when the representatives of governments all around the world gather in New York City at the UN, we need to be on the streets making our voice heard.
New York City's anti-nuclear demonstration turned out to be the biggest political demonstration in U.S. history.
It was, and still to this date, is the largest single gathering, if you will, of people in this country. I think there was one computer in the office. Everything else was by phone and this thing we called the mail. We now call it a snail mail, whatever. But there was something about that reality that we didn't have the technology that we now have that actually forced people to talk directly to each other.
We have real peace with real justice. We will not go home and be quiet. We will go home and organize.
One of the really interesting things about that demonstration is that some 600 local groups were formed, and many of those groups lasted for years afterwards. To me, the real power of that day was the organizing experience that led up to it, and then the organizing that came out of it.
Some experts are saying now that the whole world is heating up because of a global greenhouse effect.
Scientists had been saying for a long time that climate change might occur, but 1988 is the year when Jim Hansen and his team at NASA say, both in the scientific peer-reviewed literature and in public, that it's actually happening.
The changes in atmospheric composition that humans were making was going to have a big impact on the Earth's climate. The greenhouse effect has been detected, and it is changing our climate now.
Hansen's testimony was reported on the front page of the New York Times, and there was actually a bill introduced into Congress, the National Energy Policy Act, to immediately begin to phase out the use of fossil fuels in order to prevent disruptive climate change. And of course, that was supported by the creation of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that year. So there was political momentum, there was scientific momentum, there was strong scientific evidence, there was media attention, and then the whole thing kind of fell apart.
The Earth Summit, a 12-day, 178-nation conference on the environment, began today in Rio de Janeiro. Battle lines are already drawn between the haves and the have-nots.
So far, all the agreements are non-binding, requiring no specific action on the environment.
As time has gone on, the scientific warnings keep intensifying, and yet there has been no effective political response. All political efforts to get a handle on this issue have essentially failed.
I am the one that is burdened with finding the balance between sound environmental practice on the one hand and jobs for American families on the other.
The agreement hammered out in Kyoto, Japan, requires industrialized nations to make substantial cuts in greenhouse gas emissions.
The United States actually never ratified the Kyoto Protocol, which is one reason it didn't work.
President Bush ignited a storm of controversy when he decided to abandon the Kyoto Protocol, which sets caps on the emissions of greenhouse gases in developed nations.
For nearly 2 weeks, the U.S. delegation had blocked proposal after proposal, draft after draft, refusing to even discuss mandatory cuts in greenhouse emissions.
Now we switch to the big climate conference going on in Copenhagen.
Today, developing countries made themselves heard.
People are dying.
Led by Africa, 135 nations, including India and China, staged a 5-hour boycott, angry over what they say are insufficient carbon cuts proposed by the world's rich countries.
If Hollywood had been writing the story, you know, it all would have come right in the end, and all the nations would have pledged their best effort. And nothing like that happened. The thing was a fiasco, a failure.
The frustrations of the last 10 days explode on the streets of Copenhagen. Outside the Bella Center, where negotiators still haven't reached a climate agreement, 2,500 protesters try to storm the hall to make an impact.
Nothing happened because the fossil fuel industry was still strong enough to scare nations into avoiding the issue.
What happened in Copenhagen for a lot of people was this realization: no leader was coming to save us.
We have to be strong enough to scare our national leaders into doing the right thing in New York City in September. If we can demonstrate that, then better things will happen in Paris than happened in Copenhagen.
These things are not separate moments in time. This is all part of one string, and what we're fighting towards in Paris is highly dependent on what happens in September. This is going to have to be the fight of our lives.
Welcome to this press conference to present the report of IPCC Working Group 3 on mitigation of climate change.
If we really want to bring about a limitation of temperature increase to no more than 2 degrees Celsius, there is then the need for an unprecedented level of international cooperation.
The way we've approached climate change is the scientific community builds the case, it synthesizes the evidence, it presents that evidence then to the policymakers. We've proven beyond a doubt that climate change is real, that the Earth's temperature is warming, that warming is predominantly caused by the burning of fossil fuels and other human activities, and that additional warming poses a significant threat. What the policymaking community did was they came up with a definition of what they called dangerous human interference.
In 2009, the nations of the world agreed on a target of 2 degrees centigrade or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit of maximum warming above the pre-industrial level. That would require emissions worldwide almost entirely stopping within a matter of decades.
A lot of people talk about 2 degrees being the safe level. Well, there is no safe level. 2 degrees is a round number that would be safer, but we'll still have substantial climate impacts.
1 degree is melting the Arctic and the Antarctic. We'd be crazy to find out what 2 degrees will do, but we're probably going to find out. Even if we do everything right at this point, that's about as good an outcome as we can hope for.
The other thing that the IPCC did was that they tied that 2 degrees Celsius, 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit threshold to the amount of fossil fuels that we can actually burn. And they came up with this red line in the sand, which was 1 trillion tons of carbon.
The problem is that we're already more than halfway there. We're approaching 600 million tons already, and at the rate things are going, we will have completely exhausted that carbon budget within 30 years.
The same leaders who say they want the temperature to go up no more than 2 degrees have put forward a series of proposals that, when you add them up, leads to the temperature rising 6 degrees. A point past which most sane scientists think civilization on the scale that we now know it will not be possible.
It's almost a kind of refusal to come to grips with reality. There's just this enormous gap between what countries say they want to do and what they're actually on track to do. People call this the emissions gap.
Much of this is about mathematics. You got to leave 80% of fossil fuel in the ground. Fossil fuel industry wants to burn all its reserves. If they do, then we get that 6 degrees.
Each day of inaction, each day of business as usual puts us closer and closer on this crash course.
We're 2 months out from this demo. Obviously, we all know in this room a tremendous amount of work is happening every day, getting the word out, organizing people, mobilizing people. At this point, every day counts. And every day when we miss an opportunity, it's gone.
Because it's not just a one-day march, it's our long-term ability to build a strong climate movement that we need to invest in. So being inclusive to us is really about multiple things, but recognizing that we live in a society where there's privilege, there are inequities. In order to address the climate crisis, we have to first address those inequities. That will allow us to then bring a movement strong enough to address the global ecological crisis.
If you think for a second about this, there was this just layer of stuff under the ground, got put there at a specific time in a specific way, and it just captured millennia of solar energy. And we just happened upon it. It's like if you were just walking around and then like, oh, you put something in the ground, there's just millions of dollar bills down there. You're just like pulling them out. Everything about what we do and who we are and how we live is dependent upon the fact that we just found this stuff sitting there. And that stuff said, oh, you don't have to have everyone working in the fields all the time. You can have cities, you can have cars, you can have iPhones. And the way I view it is, as incredible as that stuff is, we've been paying this price on it the whole time, right? And there's this clock running.
The classic market failure is negative environmental externalities. That's just jargon for you're not paying the full costs of the fossil fuels that you burn.
The racket that the fossil fuel industry has run is to take costs of its product and export them to the public.
Think about, the litany of impacts from sea level rise, ocean acidification, the collapse of ecosystems that we rely on for food, water availability. These things are really expensive. When you have huge wildfires, it costs a lot of money. All of those costs are being dumped onto us as a society and not being paid by people who are polluting.
These big, massive polluters get to dump megatons of carbon in the atmosphere for free. You can't pollute for free. If you litter, you get a fine.
That makes coal and oil and other fossil fuels more competitive against solar and wind and other sources than they deserve to be. Behind the environmental problems that carbon pollution causes and behind the economic problems is a political problem that a very small group of very powerful special interests have exerted very rough control over the political establishment.
We're up against the fossil fuel lobby that has complete access to the political class and the ability to bribe through legal means and blackmail through the use of attack ads and so on. Even people who oppose them have trouble opposing them too strongly because they're in some ways economically dependent on them.
Right now, we have a monopoly control by big carbon polluters. They grant themselves subsidy after subsidy. Think about this. How much money does the Pentagon spend helping big private oil companies get their for-profit products from the Middle East here? About half the Pentagon's budget is just helping Chevron and Shell and Exxon get their for-profit product here. What if they had to pay for that service? How much would gas cost then? Plus, they also get all kind of tax breaks and other kind of loopholes.
They're in a system based on a grow or die ethic. But rather than respond to the climate crisis by scaling back, they're doubling down through fracking, through tar sands oil, through coal exports, mountaintop removal. They have become more brazen.
It's a rogue industry. It's an industry whose business plan is followed to the letter will wreck the planet. Once you know that, then you know that these are now illegitimate business plans. We have to figure out how to disassociate ourselves with them. And that is beginning to happen all over the world.
On the great lawn of Central Park, I was up on a stage probably 70 feet in the air, looking out at that sea of people stretching out farther than the eye could see. The crowd estimates later were larger than 1 million people.
April the 22nd, 1970. The grassroots mobilization which we recall as the first Earth Day. 20 million Americans called away from their jobs and their classes into the streets of their communities.
When Nixon was looking at television at these huge crowds in city after city after city across the country, he apparently muttered to Ehrlichman, man, a lot of those people have got to be Republican. And Republicans needed him to do something for them on this issue, he felt, and it was Nixon, arguably one of the most anti-environmental presidents in American history, who felt compelled to sign the Clean Air Act.
I think the things that we've been doing to date are a reason to give us a little bit of hope. We've seen a degree of responsiveness on the part of now of the House of Representatives and on the part of the U.S. Senate.
In a matter of 3 years, we passed the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, National Environmental Policy Act, the Environmental Education Act, Superfund. I'd go so far as to say that with the possible exception of the New Deal, it was the most fundamental restructuring of the ground rules of the American economic system that the nation has experienced.